Battle of Skrasforge, written by J.S. Morin, narrated by Michael Naramore. Genric, son of Gradrak, sat cross-legged on the floor, tapping at a couple of blocks of metal with a little copper hammer. The bigger block was his anvil, and the smaller one was his workpiece. He used his fingers for tongs, dipping the rectangular bronze ingot atop a steel bar that was serving as his forge. A song spilled from his lips, off-key and with the words not quite right, intended to be the smith's boast, which he'd recently learned.
Anvil rings and the bell is blown, and into the coals is thrown.
12 years of age for a dwarf was old enough to pick out one's own clothes and put one's toys away, but among the Dwendi, it was still too young for formal school. Genric had an easy life, a good home, plenty to eat, loving parents, and a baby brother napping next door in the nursery. It was hard to ask any more than that. Genric was starting to get hungry. Knowing better than to leave a hot workpiece on his anvil, he picked up his bronze ingot and dunked it onto the blanket that was his quenching trough. Before he could venture off in search of a snack, a shriek from outside caught his attention. Toddling over to the window, he climbed atop his toy box to peer outside. The city of Skrasforge spread before him. Fire from forges, real ones, and torches and the canals of magma cast the city's granite and marble in shades of red, casting funny, flickering shadows on the features of towering statues meant to represent ancestors and heroes of the Dwendic people. Beyond the city, Genric's vantage was high enough for him to see out into the great caverns, where a pale fungal glow revealed the contours of native rock. From those caverns, chaos poured. Shadows flew, and the cave bats were bigger and uglier than Genric had ever seen. And the shrieks were louder right by the window. The noise went right through his ears from both sides and smashed together right in Genric's brain. By reflex, he clapped his hands over his ears and shut his eyes. When that didn't stop the sound, he peeked out of a squinted eye and took a hand from one ear to slam shut the iron shutters of his playroom window. That helped, but now Genric was breathing hard. His heart was pounding. He ran from the room, shouting at the top of his lungs,
Nanny Minda! Nanny Minda! There are monsters!
Minda, daughter of Fringoi, sat with her feet on the seat of the chair next to her. On the table beside her in the kitchen, she had a tankard of beer and a stack of lead plates with her completed homework on them. She was short and lacked meat on her bones, something the beer was supposed to help with. Due to years of experience with small children, she kept her hair in a single braid, pinned into a tight spiral atop her head, somewhat resembling a hat. The style wasn't popular among her peers, but they didn't need to worry about someone tugging on, swinging from, or attempting to climb their hair. Minda did. Presently, she perused the more durable tin plates with the week's news imprinted on them. Her own parents didn't subscribe, but Gradrak and Oleana sort of had to. In the 4-hour gap when neither of them could be home, Minda watched their boys and kept her head in the goings-on of the wider city. With Gen playing and Ned napping, she had the place more or less to herself. It made her feel grown up, like she had a family of her own. Though fully grown, she was still only 45, with another 5 years until graduation. She took a long sip of beer, savoring the taste. It was a better brew than her parents kept around. Gradrak made his own, and not a whole lot of it. If he weren't so busy learning to take over the clan someday, he could have been a master brewer, Minda was convinced. The bubbling stew over the magma grate filled the room with the scent of mushrooms and spider meat.
Nanny Minda! Nanny Minda! There are monsters! Dinner's in an hour, she called back. Can you make it without a snack? And keep it down! Nettie's sleeping.
Genrick burst into the kitchen, eyes wide.
But the monsters! Lower your voice. I'll come play monsters. Just don't go waking up your brother.
Genrick rushed over and took her by the hand.
Not play monster! Real ones!
Minda donned a smirk of chagrin. What was it going to be this time? Any rat smaller than a puppy or a spider that would fit in a bucket, and Genrick was getting himself another talking to about fibbing. As she was hauled bodily out of the room by a boy who was a wee bit too strong for her liking, Minda chugged down the last of her beer and managed to deposit the tankard on the table before it was out of reach. In the nursery, Nedrum stirred.
Mama! Just a minute, Nettie.
Minda spoke to the door on the way past. Genrick's playroom was shuttered, which struck her as odd. The family never kept the window closed unless there was a chimney blockage at the forges or there was a load of pitch blende being delivered. But those shutters were exactly where Genrick pointed as soon as they entered.
Out there!
Minda extracted her hand and opened the shutters wide. The sight beyond turned her blood to stone.
Skra, defend us. The city's under attack.
The air rang with the unmistakable sound of the watchfire bell. Oleana, daughter of Helfa, dropped her tongs and hammer, leaving a bar of steel to its fate in the forge during her absence. She was bare-armed and wearing a leather apron over her iron-cloth coveralls. The apron ended up on a hook by the door, and she grabbed a steel helmet off another hook, jamming it onto her head over the kerchief holding back her hair. Snatching up a shield and axe, she raced from the forge to find out what kind of trouble woke the bell-ringers from their drunken laziness. There was no time for armor. Armor was for marching out to meet a foe or for formal warfare. Ambushes were notoriously informal occasions. Once outside, she could tell that this was neither a drill nor a mistake. Dark shapes blurred against the backdrop of the cavern ceiling. She heard the distinctive wail of her militia unit's assembly horn and followed the sound. All around her, shopkeepers, grocers, cobblers, tailors, clerks, farmers, and brewers took up arms and rallied to their militia commanders. Oleana dodged and veered to avoid militia recruits from other companies as they rushed to form up with their own units. Her commander's horn sounded again, and Oleana sprinted up a flight of steps between levels of the terraced outer city. In the cavern skies, winged nightmares flocked, breaking away and diving to catch a dwarf in an unwary moment. A glimpse of motion in the corner of her eye while ascending the stairs made her drop down and raise her shield. The impact slammed her face into the step above her, but the helmet kept it from dazing her. On her feet, as soon as the beast flew clear, she zeroed in on the horn at its next call and finally caught sight of Erden's steel fist, blasting the horn yet again as his troops filtered in. An overnight clerk at the steel mill, he was in a nightshirt and boots to go with his helmet and shield. A warhammer dangled from a loop behind his shield since he had no belt to buckle it to.
"We don't know what they are, except dead as soon as we start fighting back. Form up!"
Erden ordered. Oleana lined up in a shield wall with her militia comrades. To her left, Pern Skjelsen. On her right, Sebena Greatless daughter. They were her brother and sister, not by blood ancestors in her veins, but by blood of foes spilled. Goblins, trolls, lizard folk. When the giants got ornery, the Dwendi of the Dragonhammer clan charged a price in red liquid. Today, based on the few good strikes against the flying monsters, that price would be converted into black.
"Demons in the city, High Priest,"
Jank Orthenson informed his older brother. From the top tier of the plaza side of the city, Hranmak Dragonhammer, son of Orthon, took the news with a disgusted grunt. As both the head of Clan Dragonhammer and High Priest of the city's namesake, Skrasforge was under his protection. A pair of attendants was already working to armor him as he listened to reports coming in. Goblins sighted in the caverns, along with a few units of troll mercenaries. Demons flying in from caverns unknown. Militia units all rallying to the city's defense. The regular army was forming up and arming, prepared to march out and push the invaders back into whatever holes they'd crawled out of, just as soon as the initial assault was repelled.
"Bringing demons into the mix is new," Hranmak declared. "But we've fought off demons before."
Cenk nodded, ceding the point, but he had to clarify one detail.
"Never this many." "More hammer work is all," Hranmak replied.
On cue, he held out a gauntleted hand, and one of the attendants pressed the haft of the Dragonhammer into his grasp. Made of a steel alloyed with pitchblende and bearing the image of a dragon on the two opposing faces, the Dragonhammer's head was the size of a 3-gallon cask, making it generally unsuitable for combat use. But while the average dwarven soldier could barely lift the 16-stone weapon, Hranmak carried it as a mark of honor and swung it like the vengeance of his god. Throne room windows overlooked the great plaza. All along the near side, homes and workplaces lined the stone walls, all carved by Dwendic hands. On the other side, the throat of Ignat's Eye was breached a dozen stories up and blocked with the great magma dam, which allowed a slow trickle into the lava ducts running throughout the city. Between there and here, a massive cavern with breaches into the magma sea prevented disaster if there was ever an eruption or a failure of the dam. Just looking out there gave Hranmak peace. The Dragonhammers had tamed this volcano over a few generations. It was their power source, both thermally and spiritually.
"Come on, Cenk,"
the high priest told his brother, slamming the haft of the clan's ancestral weapon across his empty gauntlet.
"Let's go show our uninvited guests some Dragonhammer hospitality."
The kitchen of Gradrak and Oleana's house didn't have a cavern view. That was perfect for today. Minda sat with Ned in her lap and an arm around Genrick beside her. While technically Neddy was a little too young to be drinking hard liquor, Minda had mixed a dash of whiskey into the baby's tankard along with his beer and screwed on the spill-proof nozzle. She and Genrick passed the rest of the bottle back and forth between them. Between drinks, she sang to the boys. Work songs, playground songs, a few songs about romance that, in retrospect, weren't appropriate for small children. But it was loud enough, even with the tremor in her voice, to drown out the muted sounds of battle that managed to filter their way through the home's thick stone walls. When Minda ran out of songs that came readily to mind, she made up one of her own.
When Gen and Ned got out of bed,
She paused to figure out where this was going, drawing out the note until she came up with,
hammer hit them on the head.
She reached up and tapped Genrick on the noggin.
They went to Minda and they said, is the lump on my head red?
The boys listened in silence, Ned too sleepy and Gen too anxious to care.
Come on, sing along,
she coaxed. And when she started up again, Genrick mumbled the words. A verse later, she made him improvise a line of his own and didn't scold him when it involved farts. Every bit of the song was about the three of them, and it was all silly and light-hearted and had nothing to do with people fighting and maybe dying outside in the city. Not every demon flew. That was nice to know in a grim sort of sense. But the ones that didn't fly seemed all the bulkier in exchange. Oleana wouldn't have minded facing off against one of the spindly flying kind, rather than trying to hold back a hulking behemoth of black scales and leather and fangs and claws and a tongue with a razor's tip that had caught Pern in the shoulder, leaving a wound that looked infected already. Their adversaries came in several distinct types. The flying ones they first encountered seemed reluctant to fight on the ground, preferring swooping attacks and snatching smaller dwarves to drop them from great heights. The pair Oleana's unit faced off against were both quadrupeds walking on clawed hands. Three-eyed, they seemed impossible to catch unawares from the sides. Elsewhere, they'd spotted bipedal demons, armored and almost human or elf-looking, aside from their reddened, burnt flesh. Those fought with giant weapons and seemed quite skilled in their use. One final type Oleana hoped the regular army got to before they could cause utter devastation. Bloated and distended, sloppy flesh covered a pustule of a body thrice the height of the tallest of dwarves. Comparatively bony limbs swatted hard enough to crack flagstones, and she'd seen one's jaws bite a donkey in half. For now, Oleana had her hands full with the tailless, scaly fox-looking things with too many eyes. Battle ought to have been all-consuming, but she couldn't help her wandering thoughts.
Anyone seen Gradrak's unit?
She called out. From down the defensive line, Brega shouted back.
I saw the 13th Infantry mustering at the plaza on my way here.
It wasn't much to go on, but at least Gradrak was starting out deep inside the city. Unless these demons had come up from the chasm, which wasn't that crazy now that Oleana considered, then he wasn't embroiled in the main fight just yet. A claw arced down, and Oleana brought up her shield, compressing with her knees to absorb the impact. Instinct and training had her use her natural bounce back to come over the top with her axe, and she felt it catch demonic flesh, even with her view blocked by her own shield. A beast screamed.
Push!
Erden bellowed. In unison, Oleana's militia unit drove forward, a foot-powered battering ram that slammed into the demons and forced them onto defense. Claws scrabbled for purchase against stalwart foes. Axes sang. Blood sprayed, both red and black. Sickening thwacks ended the existence of one creature. They drove another to a stone railing overlooking a residential street 2 stories down, then up and over it. It was still moving after a crunching impact, but another militia unit closed in quickly to finish it off.
Form up! Tend the wounded! Fall back to Basalt Square!
Oleana heard the orders and obeyed. She slung Pern's arm over her shoulder to help him as his steps faltered, and while her feet knew the way to Basalt Square without any help, her eyes scanned the city for signs of Gradrak's squad. Messengers brought reports on the run, trailing after their high priest as he marched out to do battle in defense of his city. Goblins had entered the city through breaches the demons and a few ambitious giants had wrought. The goblins would be perfect fodder for the militia. The giants ought to know better than to stick around to lose feet. There were, as best Hranmak knew, 2 peg-legged giants who'd learned a lesson in both mercy and prudence, and still saw fit to do business with the Dwendi. It was the demons that concerned him. Demons didn't often gather in great numbers. Someone had struck a bargain, and Skraw only knew the price that had been promised. He suspected it was a debt in dwarven blood, and he'd die in the cold before he let these misbegotten goblins sacrifice his people to the gods they'd bartered with.
Where's the worst of it?
Hranmak demanded as his entourage reached the cavern side of the city.
By the vaults,
the officer in charge of keeping track of piddling details replied instantly.
One of the pig demons is trying to batter its way into the vault.
What were they after? Instead of voicing that thought, the high priest boasted aloud,
Good. It'll hold until we get there.
He led the way. As they descended from the 8th tier, one of the buzzard demons swooped in. Hranmak batted it from the sky with a one-handed swing of the Dragonhammer. The aerial pest's chest caved in, and the high priest had to shake the hammer to fling the remains loose over the side of the stairway. He had spotted the creature from the corner of his eye because he wore no helmet. Better to let enemy and ally alike see who joined them on the battlefield. Morale was more important than protecting a skull already harder than stone. But the protector of the city also marked himself as a priority target for any foe with a brain. The airborne menaces kept clear. The others used caution, but made their move. It was a battle the whole way. Hranmak's elite squad was mostly present to keep him from getting surrounded or dragged down by numbers. Anything he faced off against was crushed. The four-handed dogs scratched futilely at his armor and got their skulls cracked like walnuts. The weapon masters fared better, measuring Hranmak's reach and scoring his armor with their blows. But when he failed to respect the threat of their accursed weapons, they had little recourse. Trading blows favored the hammer meant to slay dragons and the armor 2 fingers thick. But Hranmak's comrades didn't come through unscathed. He lost Barth and Uric to a scythe-wielding demon. One of the dogs got Egger by the leg, and he'd crawled a retreat. Jenk's shield dangled from a broken arm as he fought on, grimacing through the effort to hold on to the bulwark. At the vault, the slovenly, oozing demon turned to regard them. It grinned with 1,000 fangs that covered not just its jaws, but the roof of its mouth and the bed below its tongue as well. It spoke with the echo of a grindstone.
Sto tugma nijazabuskra ingak.
Blast me if I caught a word of that, but scraw.
And I'll be teaching you to keep my god's name off that forsaken tongue of yours, demon.
Hranmak turned to his remaining squad.
Keep back. Don't let it escape to the city when it realizes its doom.
The thing outweighed Hranmak 100 times over, even in his armor. Its chuckle at the idea that it might run boomed through the vault's foyer. A limb thrice Hranmak's height slammed down. Too swift a blow to dodge, he brought up the Dragonhammer and braced a foot behind him. Bone cracked as the dwarf stood firm, and the haft of the hammer didn't snap. The demon recoiled, and its next swipe with its other arm was tentative. It snaked a long neck toward him and snapped, but pulled up short as the head of the Dragonhammer whistled past. Strong as he was, Hranmak had a heft to him that the armor helped augment. But there was a limit to how hard he could swing that massive hammer without it dragging him off balance after a miss. The demon pounced. Its nimbleness belied its bulk, and it was on Hranmak in a flash. In 244 years beneath this mountain, the high priest of Skra had fought his share of battles, had trained for longer than most members of the clan had been alive. His feet knew the dance. He let the head of the Dragonhammer touch the floor, used it as a pivot, and landed on his feet on the far side. By the time the demon's head lanced out to see whether it could bite through Dwendic armor, he was already squared up and swinging once again. A thunderous double crack rang out. First from the Dragonhammer catching the demon under the jaw, the second from that jaw slamming closed through no intent of its own. In a daze, the creature sprawled face down on the stone floor. Up came the Dragonhammer, with Hranmak rising on the toes of his boots. Down came the Dragonhammer, crushing the creature's skull. His comrades rushed in to make sure the demon didn't get up again. Sweat dripped from Hranmak's brow as he stepped out into the city again, in search of his next priority. The fight had taken longer than he realized. Goblins marched through the streets. Demons ate dwarf flesh. Hranmak's own forces were in retreat, fighting to hold ground that slipped through their fingers with every pace backward. Inverting the Dragonhammer, Hranmak knelt with the head resting on the flagstones of Marble Street.
Skra, this is our time of need. As you once came to my father, show me your blessing in this dark hour.
Screams of the dying echoed throughout the caverns. Too few were the high-pitched shrieks of the goblin invaders. Jenk gave him a nudge in the shoulder with the butt of his axe.
Come on! Gonna have to win this ourselves.
A hollow pit formed in Hranmak's soul. There was no winning this battle. Skra had abandoned Clan Dragonhammer when they needed him most. Across Skrasforge, his family was dying. Whether by blood or by pledge, they were all Clan Dragonhammer, all his kin. He couldn't allow them to be wiped out defending a home whose patron wouldn't lend them aid.
Sound the bell. Order the evacuation of Skrasforge.
Oleana heard the watchfire bell as her unit roved the middle tiers, trying to keep the goblins from advancing into the city and farther. She voiced her puzzlement aloud.
Again? But
It's the evacuation order,
Erden Steelfist confirmed.
Children and treasures, everyone! Gather up the children and treasures! Head for the surface!
Her unit broke up. This was no longer a holding action, but a scramble to save anyone and anything they could. Oleana didn't need to be told twice. Her feet were already moving before Erden clarified where to go. Everyone knew the drill. The older children were taught the meaning of the bells, the way to the surface, and what to bring with them. They practiced twice a decade, and it always seemed like a silly exercise. Ha ha, yeah. What to do if the city falls. Skra protected the city from the vast sea of magma burbling just beyond the plaza walls and rationed it in safe trickles upon request of the dam operators. The army and militia defended everyone from threats that were capable of thinking. No one attacked a dwarven city and won. Except today. In a daze, Oleana traced a path her boots could have trod without her in them. Home. All that mattered was getting to the boys and making sure they got out safe. Gradrak was important too, but he had his own duties and his own good head on his shoulders to get himself out of trouble. Genrick and Nedrum needed her. That was the only thought in her mind. If they couldn't save Skrasforge, they needed to save as many of the people within as possible. If she got her boys out, Oleana was willing to venture back in for stragglers or clan treasures, but until then, a flow of raging lava wouldn't have diverted her course. Her boots pounded up the steps. She swung her axe, catching unwary demons and goblins unable to make sense of the dwarven chaos to defend themselves. They were willing, sure, but it was a messy victory, with casualties aplenty for their side. Up, up. Around a corner, up once again. She tried the door to her home and found it barricaded. Using her axe fist, she pounded and shouted through the metal.
Minda! Let me in! We're getting out of here!
The scrape of a chair preceded the throwing of a bolt and the door swinging open.
I heard the bell,
Minda explained.
but we couldn't just go.
That was precisely what they were meant to do. Minda should have already turned those boys loose. Anyone armed and out on the streets would have given their lives to protect any of the three of them. Minda was just an older child herself, after all.
Mama!
Nedrum called out, waddling over with his arms outstretched.
Mommy, what's going on?
Genrick demanded. Oleana knelt and looked her eldest in the eye.
It's a bit scary outside, but we're leaving. Out of the mountain. You stay with Minda. Minda, don't let go of his hand.
As for Nedrum, Oleana propped her shield against the wall and scooped the tyke up in one arm, balancing him on her hip.
Let's move.
Minda slung a travel pack over her shoulder, clattering with Skra knew what. She grabbed Genrick by the hand, gave a nod, and followed. Back out on the streets, axe in hand, Oleana was the shield now. Genrick kept his feet under him. His arm, stretched to its limit, didn't give him slack to go wandering. Minda's hand was so tight it hurt, but Genrick hardly noticed. He was too distracted by the chaos all around them. The streets and corridors of the city were packed with people. Everyone was running, crying, carrying loads of clothes and chests and sacks and wearing backpacks. Genrick had seen these people all his life, and they never did any of that. Nothing looked right. Aside from there being too many people, the colors were wrong. Fires in the wrong places. Smoke that wasn't going up the chimneys. Red puddles in the roads. Nothing sounded right. The forge's pleasant ring of steel and iron had been replaced by angry clangs and clatters. The screams in the air didn't even all sound like sounds people made. Shouting, so much shouting. Names, questions, the aforementioned crying. Genrick wasn't allowed to wander the city, but that didn't mean he hadn't seen a lot of it. There was a good chance he'd been this way before, but he'd never have recognized it. He navigated by the pull on his arm, basically just moving his feet to keep from falling over. Nedrum was crying. Genrick knew that cry anywhere. It came from nearby, but turning to see where didn't find him Mom or Ned. All he had was Minda, and she kept an iron grip on his hand. Most of what Genrick saw were hips and shins and boots and flashes of steel. A chorus of screams came from straight ahead of them. The crowd veered. Minda pulled him along as Genrick failed to see what had caused the fresh commotion. Craning his neck just caused him to stumble and get hauled back to his feet by the arm, proving that Minda didn't need his cooperation here. Genrick was glad not to get lost in the madness, but he would have liked to know where Nedrum and Mom ended up. Either Mom had gotten his baby brother to stop crying, or they'd gotten separated from Minda and Genrick's part of the stampede.
Keep up,
Minda told him as she yanked in a new direction. Genrick was barely touching the floor anymore.
We'll find your mother outside.
Steel slammed against steel. Strange, undwarven voices shouted. Another change of direction. Minda's hand was wet with sweat. More screams. Minda stumbled. Genrick tried to help her up, but she groaned and lay still. He tugged at her hand, but she was too heavy to move. In a panic, all alone amid a sea of distant relatives, Genrick headed the only place he could think of. Outside, to find his mother. Genrick didn't recall much after that. It was a blur, like some little mason in his skull didn't know what runes to carve to commit any of it to memory. An unfamiliar adult threw a coat over him to keep him from shivering in the frigid surface air, and he kept the extra length pulled high as a hat to keep from seeing the searing sun and the impossibly distant ceiling that was making him dizzy just looking at it. "Gen?" a voice called out. Genrick turned and spotted a familiar face at last.
Uncle Hjol!
Dad's younger brother had Ned with him. He was armored, but wasn't carrying any weapons or a shield. Ned was bundled in a blanket, red-faced from the cold. Once he made eye contact, a weary smile broke out on his uncle's face. He turned. "Gradrak! I found him!" Dad was there in a hammer's blow, fancy in his commander's armor. He slipped and slid as the uneven surface of Ignat's eye was slick with snow. "Genrick! Oh, Gen! When I heard Minda... never mind about that. You all right?" Genrick shook his head, sniffing.
I want Mommy.
Dad picked Genrick up and hugged him. Just then, the mountain shook. A plume of ash jetted into the sky, and a spout of lava with it. Spent emotionally, few of the Dragonhammer clan cried out at the sight. Genrick took his father's lead and just watched the spectacular sight from a vantage that strangely felt safe. As the initial eruption ebbed, the mouth of the volcano overflowed, sending torrents of lava washing down the mountainside. But the flow parted around the refugees. The entrance from which they'd fled was buried. A few brave souls approached the flow to bask in the warmth it provided against the surface weather.
"Where's Mommy?"
Genrick asked. Dad set him down and looked him in the eye. "Your mom will be staying with the ancestors, back in the mountain." Genrick leaned to see past his father, trying to find a way back.
"I want to go with her!"
There was a hitch in Dad's voice.
"We'll all go someday. Yours is a long way off. Your mom, she's an ancestor now. You'll see her again when the time is right. Until then, we just keep going."
Genrick returned to watching the eruption that was Skrah's parting gift to his worshippers. Someday, he promised himself, he'd go back inside the mountain and find Mom. Thanks for listening to this Dragonhammer Saga story. Don't worry, there's still plenty to learn about the Dwendi dwarves of the Dragonhammer clan. To continue listening, search Dragonhammer Saga at your favorite audiobook store or visit dragonhammersaga.com. This has been Battle for Skrasforge, written by J.S. Morin, narrated by Michael Naramore. Copyright 2025 by J.S. Morin. Production copyright 2025 by J.S. Morin.